Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're looking at Data Live with Data Bullet because Data Bullet has just come out and it impacts Data Live. So we're going to take a look at 8 Standby. 8 Standby we already did on the channel. I'll have a link in the description somewhere. With that in mind, I wanted to quickly highlight a couple cards that were worth talking about that could potentially be impactful in some way before looking at a couple different lists of Data Live and Data Bullet, and what a Data Bullet only deck would look like. So before getting to those, wanted to quickly highlight a couple different cards here. Looking at these cards in the context of 8 Standby Data Live, these Data Bullet cards are interesting, but are they worth putting in? So I'm going to look at these 5 real quick. Nightmare Queen Kermie, pay 1, put a character from Waiting Room into the bottom of your clock, and then search for a level 1 or lower character. Really interesting card. It does a lot of things really, really well. That being, you're not potentially blind clocking a climax. You are able to search, especially early on, having the ability to search in your deck for the level 1 or lower card you need. Because you have the choice of what card you're putting into clock, you also can color fix in some ways, so color isn't a problem here with that. When looking at in the context of 8 Standby, it becomes questionable as to whether or not you would want to run it. Like, it does a lot of things well. It helps you push you forward, helps advance the game state so you can kind of get into level 1 first, potentially, with this. It allows you to be able to keep climaxes out of your clock, which is important for that. But with Standby, especially at that point in the game, you're really looking for more like 1/1s to field. Maybe you're using this to get the back row Toka or the counter. Because outside of that, really, you're going to be spending additional stock. So you're paying 1 stock in order to get a card to hand, which is good. But if you're paying 1 stock and you're already kind of probably a little bit lighter on stock at this point, so it becomes a kind of question of, is it enough? We also have Declaration of War Queen. This is an alternative brainstormer that salvages, which is pretty nice. It also has on play, you can pay 2 to essentially grappling hook your opponent's characters around on field. You can move them around, which is a really interesting tech, especially to include in this, because you're able to then pull characters forward, especially when you're winning board. You can pull your opponent's back row characters forward to win and over those and continue to get reverses and push the advantage you already have. Outside of that, like, it doesn't flow as well with it as the Toka Brainstormer does, so it's kind of like a really interesting off-tech piece. Whether it's worth running, that's more up to individuals at that point. We also have Holding at Gunpoint Kermie. On attack, grant power to something else, but has an alarm effect if it's the top card in your clock on your opponent's turn, the beginning of their climax phase. All of your characters get the ability to discard a card to gain 2k power. So it's like having backups across the board, prepared already in place with just a discard of a card. Interesting, whether that's worth it or not, because you can tag this on with a counter. So if you have the 2k counter, you discard another card and 2k counter, now you're at 4k over what you initially were. But at the same time, that's also going to cost a significant amount of hand to be able to do that. Especially early, you already have character card Encore, so you can keep your characters around with just a single discard, whereas this is kind of setting up to do that single discard and another card with it. So you could potentially pay 2 cards to keep your character alive as opposed to just 1. Probably not worth the deck slots that this would require for it. But it's an interesting card, and I think it's a trap card, really, because I think it sounds more broken than it actually is. Next up, we have Derived Answer Kermie. This is actually the PR card from the surprise set that hasn't come out. But it's an interesting card that would work pretty well with this 8 Standby build. When it's placed on stage, you can pay 2 to return a character to your opponent's hand. So pay 2 bounce. And when you attack, you can grant a character named Kermie an additional 1,000 power. So choose a different character with Kermie in name. Hey, look, your 1/1 standby targets have Kermie in name. Hey, look, you have the option of the 2/2 target with hand encore with Kermie in name. Hey, look, your level 3 has Kermie in name. It sounds pretty fantastic. Be able to grant additional power on attack and have an open lane to be able to swing into. So you can continue to push damage, remove troublesome targets. Interesting card, interesting check choice. We also have Penetrating Bullet Kermie. 2/1 counter, it's your memory kick counter. When you use this as a backup and you defeat your opponent's power, you can send that card to memory. It's a 3K backup, which is a little bit bigger than the free fresh backup, which 500 power can potentially make or break a difference in some cases. This is very situational because it can answer some things right away. Like, for example, H-Choice Slime gets eaten up by this. Many of these can potentially be meta calls as well, as if you know what you're going into and what you're playing against, that they could potentially be tech pieces you add in to make or break the difference in the deck. Because realistically, 8 standby decks are pretty close to being the same things, right? Especially for Data Live. I'm going to quickly flash up, this is the image of the 8 standby deck build from the previous video. See, it's pretty straightforward, pretty standard listing. And then I also have a newer variation on that same deck with Data Bullet cards in it. There's a single Data Bullet card in it. Although worthy to note that the PR card is the same profile as a card in Data Bullet, so exchange those one for one and still have the same effects. So you could have potentially 2 Data Bullet cards in this deck. The deck doesn't really change a whole lot from that one to this one. Realistically, in that video, I talked about different options of what it could look like with alongside the Data Live list. This one has some of those changes put into it, just a little bit more effective in the current meta. One of those things being Yoshino. Field swapping is pretty important. But outside of that, we're not going to go into a whole lot of details with this list, partly because this list was specifically covered in that video. If you want to check that out, you can kind of look at some of those reasons and choices of why some of these cards have been chosen. I'm just going to go over some of the more interesting cards here that are more tech choices for me as opposed to potentially what other people could be running as well. I run one of the Climax Swap, which is the Origami Climax Swap, partly because of the first effect. If you want to reveal your hand and have a Climax in it, you could subtract 500 power from your opponent's board. That can be really interesting in certain situations, especially if they have 500 power characters on field. Because we have quite a few of those running around now in quite a few decks, being able to remove those from field and deny your opponent that advantage those cards bring, pretty good. The other level 0 tech choice that I have is the Trying on Kermi, the PR card. Being able to side attack without decreasing soul penalty. I had this in here as kind of like a fail case of like, if for some reason I'm playing against a standby deck with the standby deck and I'm falling behind in some way, this can allow me to try to help catch up in that way. It also can allow me to finagle some of the end game a little bit more. It can also allow me to get potentially some additional soul triggers back into the deck if I need it. Can push power to different lanes and still hold a position on board that I can potentially stand by over. Or have the spot in place to be able to switch with the Yoshino. Like, it has a lot of different potential uses here, even for being able just to side attack into things. Like, for example, the Miyuki from Kaguya, being able to side into that character if I need to, and still be able to push damage, while denying the potential clock kick coming back at me. Already talked a little bit about the Yoshino. Being able to pay 1 to change places on field with any other character. Pretty awesome to be able to help save characters, but at the same time as well, you're also threatening in a way because this is also an anti-change bottom deck bomb. So you can also then remove your opponent's standby stuff when they swing into it. So being able to threaten to have the bottom deck bomb in any different lane in your front row with the character in it, you're threatening standby with this card immediately. So they have to then deal with that in some way. The only other tech card that I've really included here is the 2-1 Penetrating Bullet Kermi. Again, playing against quite a bit of slime choice, having this in there to try to turn off that endgame has been pretty helpful with that. And the additional 500 power has also been helpful with trying to defend against things, especially when you're sitting at like 12-5, pushing up to 15-5 has been very helpful as opposed to 15 proper. I think this is a pretty middle-of-the-road deck. I think this is something that you may come across, you may see something very similar to this when you're playing against Data Live. With that in mind, I really want to highlight a little bit more of this Data Bullet potential. So we did come up with a Data Bullet only list, so looking at cards with characters specifically from Data Bullet only, to be able to have something to be able to play and compete with as well. This is the 8 choice list. There's a lot of different potential things that you can do with it. Again, running the Ricky that we talked about before, the holding at gunpoint Kermi, running the Brainstormer that specifically ties in with the 2 choice combos here. because you can also grant additional power when you perform the Brainstorm. The additional power makes a bigger difference in this deck specifically. Running the Aleph Kermi, same thing as the PR looked at earlier, except it has the correct wording printed on it. We have to run the Climax swap, that just a standard Climax swap, sits at 2/5 power, Kermi in name, which is kind of important. Unfading Memory Sawa. Assuming you have 2 or less cards in memory currently, you can pay 1, look at the top 3, choose 1 character, put it into hand, and then send the card to memory. I run it as a 4 of. I recognize you can't get all 4 into memory. I am aware. You're also not going to see all 4 that you're going to pay the act to do that for. You're probably going to do it maybe twice a game. 3 times if you're desperate. You have stock to be spending elsewhere. Recognize it's 8 choice and you have potential just to stuff everything into stock. You're going to be spending stock through this deck. Because the level 1, we have the level 1 combo, which is an on-reverse combo, but it also comes with the ability when your Climax is placed that your character's in front of it can't run, or switch around to another stage position, or go into memory. So they can't run away, which helps to guarantee its reverse. It gains an additional 1,000 power by itself. Climax is another 1,000, so it sits at 6/5, which is not very big, which is why having the Brainstormer that grants power in as well, you're able to help boost up this level 1 combo to get to the power thresholds you may need for what you're facing. When it gets its reverse, you may choose a character in Waiting Room and turn it to hand. So, on reverse, +1 from Waiting Room. Decent combo for being confined to just the data bullet only items. You're also running this alongside another level 1 Imperturbable Kermi, which allows you to, when it goes to Waiting Room, look at the top 4, choose a yellow Climax in it and add it to your hand, which it also comes with the ability that you can discard itself to Waiting Room and grant something 2k power. So again, able also to pump up the level 1 combo and get the level 1 Climax. So a very important card to go alongside this level 1. Also run the Anti-Change Stock Bomb. Also run this event, Released Chains. So playing this event, you choose a card in hand and put it at the bottom of your clock, so -2 from hand, to search 2 characters with Kermi in name and put them into your hand. So it's really just a hand filter plus clocking yourself. It's not fantastic, but it allows you to be able to search 2. So being able to combine this with the Aleph Kermi, where you can shuffle 2 cards back into your deck. You can shuffle them back in, use the event, get them back out, if you need to do it that way. Level 2, run the Logical Judgment Kermi, assist level 3s, and you can also rest a card, choose a character, put it at the top or bottom of your clock, and at the end of your turn, if you put a card into clock, put the bottom card of your clock into Waiting Room. So it's a potential filter for your clock, because you could put the card on top of your clock, particularly an alarm effect you could put on the top of your clock, and then you heal from the bottom of your clock. So you could take, if whatever reason you have a Climax at the bottom of your clock, you can heal that one off and still have an alarm effect in play. It's interesting. We don't have any true counters in this deck, partly with the idea of holding at gunpoint Kermi in play. It's technically counting as like a 2k counter across board anytime, but realistically your power thresholds, you're not very big on defense, so running a counter doesn't make a whole lot of sense here if I can just push for more characters and more slots. Because realistically the power pump here isn't super important as much as it is getting cards into your clock, because we play with clock. At level 3, we have the early play that if she's at the top of your clock, you can pay 2, ditch 1 as long as you have 4 or more other characters in play already, and put it on stage in any position, and then heal. But when you remove it from clock to put it on stage, you clock yourself. So you're more or less netting 0 if you had to clock it in the first place. If you use the 2/1 to put it in there, have it on top, take it out, heal, you also then remove a card later, so you're healing 1, technically, if you use it that way. It's a lot of work to get there, but it's also, in that case, it just becomes a 4 or more early play. It gains power for characters in the backstage. If you have the 2/1 in your backstage already, it becomes a 12/5. So you have decent power there with the early play. It's just a more interesting way of getting it into play. With the 2/1, you don't have to have it in hand in order to do so. You just have to discard a card. So you're turning basically any card in hand into the early play. So you could turn basically a Climax into an early play. We have the Zafkiel Kermi. This is our level 3 combo. when it's placed on stage, during the encore step, the beginning of encore step, you can heal. So you don't heal immediately, which immediately is kind of weird, that you don't heal right away. But at the same time, you also need the card and clock for your climax combo. So that's helpful in this case. Because the climax combo itself is on attack, your character gets 1k power, and you can pay to discard a card. And at the end of your attack, you choose a card in your clock, deal X to your opponent, being that card's level +1. So having different levels of cards and clock, you can make your burn more selective. Level 0 becomes a level 1, a level 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4. You can choose based off of the level in clock. So if you have a level 0, 1, 2, all of a sudden you can burn for 1, 2, or 3. So having cards in clock at level 3 helps make this combo go off. And then at the beginning of encore step, you heal it off. So it's weird. You could also run into the situation where you refresh your deck, pushing you up to, say, 3-3, and you have 3 of these in play. At the beginning of encore step, now you're down to 3-0 again, which then makes it more challenging to take you out, right? So having those things in play is really interesting. Notably that this happens at the end of the card's attack, so that memory kick counter thing can be problematic against you because of that, and you have to pay the cost ahead of time. You pay the cost. You don't do that. So it can become problematic against you to deny that additional burn. Lastly, in this list, we run a new story, Kurumi and Hibiki. It becomes 11-5 if you have everything else in place, and on play pay 1 stock swap. Still having the ability to stock swap without having to run the level 3 from Data Live. Perfectly way to go for this. Which is great for a data bullet only deck. For me, I am slightly picky as to what I would like to see with that. Kind of seeing these mixed together, Data Live and Data Bullet, I think that comes up with an interesting list. It does things a little bit differently than 8 Standby does. So running this, I think this is a really interesting 8-choice list that I enjoy and I think is fun to play around with. Skipping over cards that we've already talked about, looking at, from this list, Shido Itsuka, the on-play Blink card into memory and back, removes any kind of cross-turn power and whatnot, or cross-turn effects. Pay 1, discard it, look at the top 4 cards, choose a character, add it to hand. So kind of another way to mill through your deck, replace this card with something else in play. I really like this effect because I can swing with this and then use the next card, the Clean Cut, to send it back to the back row and then pay 1 stock to change it into another card to keep it going. So I can change the level 0 into a level 1 for the 1 stock that I already used to swing with. So I've dealt damage and it becomes a different card. When the Clean Cut becomes reversed, it goes to bottom deck to make sure and guarantee that I don't have climaxes on the bottom card of my deck. Super helpful. Then the Confrontation with Humans Toka. This is from the Trial deck from Data Live. On play reveal, if it's a character, add it to hand, discard a card, discard a character, draw a card. So again, another way just kind of help hand filter, hand fix. I only run it as a 2 of because it does a lot of hand fixing already with this deck. But it's just another way to be able to move things around a little bit. In many ways, it's a holdover because I really like this profile, even if it's not as necessary with this deck. I really like it. It's also a good way to potentially draw into climaxes that you know are climaxes. Level 1, running the choice combo from Data Live. Gains power during your turn, sits at 5-5 on your turn, combo 6-5, just like the Kurumi from Data Bullet. We have, then combining with the imperturbable Kurumi, being able to search out that yellow climax to help, again, push this level 1 combo over and over again. The combo being, on attack, look at the top card. If it's a character or event, add it to hand, discard the rest. Because you do that twice, you can fill up your hand really quickly. You only really need 2 of the combo to essentially max out in hand. Run it alongside anything else to be able to effectively move through the deck and be able to fill up your hand. It's super important. My Little Shido coming alongside it. A lot of flexibility with this card. You rest one of your cards and you're able to look at 4, choose 1. You can level down one of your characters, so kind of anti-standby. And then at level 3, if you have 6 or less cards in hand, you could choose level 3 in waiting room to add to hand. You can fix for your endgame hand. You can play with the levels of your opponent's cards to try to step over those and win board on your turn, or potentially just continue to mill and get characters to hand. A lot of different things you can do with this card. A lot of different abilities and access with this card. I do run one of the anti-change backups with this deck. The combos are going to be pretty small. Anything that your opponent brings in, whether through standby or early plays, problematic for this deck, you can take that out with this. You're also building up hand relatively quickly and easily with the Coterie combo, so you can effectively pay this out and anti-change them into clock, which is a pretty uninteractable spot that they can't encore it back into place. Your opponent doesn't have a way of really stopping this card. And because you're building up additional hand with the combo, discarding into 2 additional cards, you build those back up really quick, especially because you save a lane here. Level 2, we have the free fresh counter because free fresh is important. Also, especially with 8 choice, you could be running into putting a bunch of climaxes into your stock. This helps pay that out as well as refresh the deck. Skipping over cards we looked at earlier, we also run in the 2-1 Words of Bravado Coterie. If you have 4 more others, you can stock charge, so you pay back the stock they used to play this card. It's also an anti-change stock bomb, so you're also removing characters from field that way too if you need to. Again, throwing this alongside 2 of the combo pieces, you're removing early plays, you're removing standby stuff, and you are starting to try to take control of the board with being lower power. Level 3 looks pretty much the same as the previous data bullet list, with the exception of having the Icy Tail in here. Icy Tail having that potential as an off finisher with this, I think makes perfect sense, especially because while Kermie can burn, it doesn't have a whole lot in regarding like your opponent's deck manipulation. This allows you for a little bit more of that deck manipulation. Do I think that this is going to be what Data Life looks in the future? I think it's still going to be looking at that 8 standby list. Right now what we're looking at is we're looking at a lot of standby heavy things. With that in mind, 8 standby Dal has a lot of tools to be able to deal with other 8 standby decks. So I think it's going to be very prevalent as the Data Live deck of choice. Even with Data Bullet coming out, I don't think we're going to see a significant boost of Data Bullet decks as much as different tech pieces in the Data Live shell, which, I mean, makes sense for an extra booster, right? That's what extra boosters are supposed to do. They're supposed to assist the main build. Sure, makes sense. With that in mind, thanks so much for joining in with us. Normally we have gameplay coming up on Thursday, but this week we're going to do something special. So look for this special thing that's going to happen this weekend. Next week on Tuesday, Monday night is going to be the English Winter Stream, so we're going to be checking that out. And on Tuesday, we're going to follow up with that, as well as put out our meta matchups for upcoming Bro. On Wednesday, we're going to be doing our Christmas charity live stream, where we're going to be able to donate to the Foundation for Decrease World Suck, where we're going to be joining together with this foundation to help needs in many different areas for many different opportunities to help decrease World Suck together. That's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's going to be the start time, and we look forward to being able to have you guys join in with us as we begin. We're going to be in it for the long haul, so we're hoping you'll join in with us as we have some special guests join with us and come at you with our first live stream as the Clock Tower. We got a lot coming out, and we're looking forward to joining in with you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.